everybody, welcome back to Biblical Greek Made Easy. This is class 15 of Module 2, and guys, this is the last class of Module 2. If you finish today's class, finish strong, take the final exam after this, you will have finished Module 2, which is oftentimes thought of as the first year of Biblical Greek. The basics of Biblical Greek will be under your belt, and that's a thing to celebrate. But before we get into me verbs today, let me share with you a scripture verse. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7, Paul shares some words, some of the last words that he shares with us in the scripture. He's writing from prison, and he says, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. And maybe that's where you're at here at the end of this struggle of learning Greek. Maybe it's been a joyful experience. Maybe it's been a struggle, whatever. Maybe it's taken you longer than you thought. Maybe it came easier than you thought. Either way, you fought a good fight and you've gotten to this point, and that's an exciting place to be. Let me encourage you. You're doing a really, really good thing. Here's the tip of the day I have for you today, okay? Today's tip of the day is to learn didomi and then go from there. That'll make more sense as we start talking here a little bit about me verbs and that sort of thing. But there's a lot going on and they can seem a little bit overwhelming. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick one me verb, in this case didomi, and we're going to learn it, and then we're going to apply those lessons to the other vocabulary, okay? We're just going to learn the ones that appear the most often. We're not going to waste brain space on stuff that we don't need to know quite as well. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and get started and talk about why this matters. So me verbs, as I mentioned, are the final verbal forms that we need to know for first year Biblical Greek. To get those basics mastered, we still need to learn me verbs because they show up a fair amount. Now notice there are just a few of these, but they tend to show up a lot, okay? The top couple of these tend to show up a considerable amount in the New Testament, and so we have to deal with them. Having an understanding of me verbs is a must in order to read and translate Biblical Greek well. So that's what we're going to do. Now our verb endings up to this point have for the most part been the same, right? Sometimes they've changed a little bit, they've behaved a little differently because of contraction or consonantal changes, but for the most part they've been the same. Me verbs are going to be a different animal, okay? We're calling them me verbs because they're going to end with that word, with those letters, mu, iota, okay? Now here's the bad news. The form at times changes so drastically that they can become almost unrecognizable, okay? That's the bad news. The good news, though, is that there's just a few of these to memorize, and the common ones, like didomi I was telling you, they show up so much that you just learn them pretty easily. If you're reading and translating the New Testament on a regular basis, you're going to come across didomi a lot, and you're going to recognize it when you see it, and that's really going to help you learn me verbs, okay? Now note, the meanings, like with every other variation we've seen, for the most part, the meanings will be exactly the same as regular verbs. These aren't a special mood, these aren't a special category, we don't translate these any different. The only difference is the form, okay? These are just verbs that form themselves a little bit differently, and for that reason they're weird, but they mean exactly the same thing, okay? So, Mounts has 5 rules he's going to share with us about me verbs, and let's go ahead and talk through these. Rule number 1. Me verbs reduplicate their initial stem letter to form the present and separate the reduplicated consonant with an iota. Okay, if that sounds like a mouthful, here's what we mean by that. We've seen the perfect form before, and we have reduplication on the front. So for pistuo, for example, we have that P on the front, and we put an epsilon there, we reduplicate the front, okay? And that's really easy to recognize because perfect verbs just stand out like a sore thumb. Okay, me verbs in the present are going to reduplicate as well, but rather than an epsilon up front, it's going to have an iota. Okay, so didomi, for example, you hear the front, that did that I'm saying, that's a delta, iota, delta on the front. Okay, we're going to see that repetition. Let me show you how this works. So here's didomi. This is what it looks like. That's the lexical form. Okay, and that just looks regular to you, but note that on the front, we have that repetition. Okay, that reduplication of that initial stem letter. We also have the me at the end, which is obviously a big sign that this is a me verb, because that's the first person singular present active indicative ending. So here's how we got there, okay? The actual stem of this word is da. delta omicron, da. Okay? So then we reduplicate the front and we get dida, and then that vowel lengthens to dido before we put the ending on it, which happens sometimes. And then we put our ending on me and we get didomi. It means I give. Okay, you see how we got there? Now you absolutely do not need to remember all of those steps of how that was built. All you need to be able to do is recognize didomi. But sometimes it can help to see what steps it goes through as we're learning these for the first time. Okay, so a key for the present for me verbs is going to be that reduplication, that iota reduplication on the front end of the verb. Okay? Rule number 2. Me verbs do not ordinarily use a connecting vowel in the present indicative. Now remember, if you've been following along in the Mounts textbook, Mounts pays a lot of attention to connecting vowels. He talks about principal parts a lot. He wants you to know exactly how we get every single step, every change that happens to every verb that you have to learn in the Greek New Testament. We have not emphasized that as much because, for the most part, you don't need to know that. It's wasting brain space. All you need to be able to do is recognize the final form. To some extent, you need to notice changes that have gone on, like with the subjunctive. If there's a lengthened connecting vowel, then that tells us that it's a subjunctive verb. But for the most part, you just don't need to memorize all of the minutia, all the little parts in there, okay? So it's important perhaps to note that there's no connecting vowel, but at the end of the day, this rule is not that important. We're going to keep moving, okay? Rule number 3. Me verbs employ 3 different personal endings in the present active. We've seen these endings show up pretty much every step of the way. There's going to be 3 new ones with me verbs, and to be honest, friends, it's just me verbs being difficult, okay? But one of them is the first person singular ending, that me. We don't see that anywhere else, but let me show you the paradigm here. You see present active indicative there. Luo, lues, lue, luam, and luete, luusi. Hopefully that's an old hat for you by now. But then look at didomi next to it. Didomi, we don't see that ending anywhere else. Didos, that one is the same. That's still a sigma on the end. Then we get didosi or didosin with a movable nu. Notice that ending, that sigma iota. That looks like third person plural, doesn't it? But it's actually third person singular. Now, for the most part, you're going to have a subject and context to remind you that that's third person singular, but it's definitely something to memorize and make a note of. Then first person plural, didamen, that's normal. Second person plural, didate, also normal. And then third person plural there, didaasi or didaasin, movable nu again. Notice that the same ending for the most part, but it has that alpha. And since we have that omicron that's not right next to the sigma, it's not lengthened. Okay, so we get didaasin, means they give. All right? They give or they are giving. Notice the note there. The present active is the only place those new endings will be used, okay? That's a little bit annoying because they just show up here in the present active with me verbs. Other than that, they don't show up. It'd almost be better if they showed up more because they'd be easier to memorize, but you just need to know that didomi are kind of weird when it comes to their endings, okay? So go ahead and look up and down that chart. Practice those a little bit. We want to be able to recognize those, practice a little parsing. Again, 3 of the 5 there are really straightforward and not too tricky at all. The other 3 are weird. Here's what the middle passive, the present middle passive indicative looks like. I gave you luo again on the left there. Luamai, lue, luetai, luamatha, luestha, and luantai. Compare that to the middle passive of didomi. Didomai, didasai, didatai, didamatha, didastha, didantai. Okay? Exactly the same. You don't have the weirdness in the second person singular. You have the regular ending there, which is sai, which usually doesn't show up, right? That's why it's lue for the present middle passive on luo. Okay? So pretty straightforward in the middle passive here, but just a little bit weird in that active side. All right? Rule number 4. The stem vowel of me verbs can lengthen, shorten, or drop out. Okay, we've seen that already a little bit, but it's something to be aware of. So go ahead and see what we got there. Doso, for example, is future. Okay, why not daso? Well, that sigma is going to cause that lengthening there. Okay, so the challenge is going to be looking at doso and remembering, oh, that's a me verb. That's actually didomi, right? You don't get the reduplication out front because it's not in the present. Okay, you do get the sigma as a tense formative, which can help you, but you just need to be aware that there's some weirdness that's going to happen there. Mounts is going to say, once you realize the root is da, it can only be one thing. Yeah, that's true, but we just need to have that, rather than memorizing that root every single time, that stem, just to have that sixth sense about didomi and the other ones like it, I think is easier, just trying to notice it in context. And you know what? If you come across it and you don't recognize it, you hover your mouse over there, it parses it for you, and you go, okay, that's right, I'll remember it next time. And you keep moving forward, because practice makes perfect, okay? That's a little bit more inductive, by the way. To go into the text and let the text teach you is a little bit more inductive than learning a million rules before you go to the text, okay? Rule number 5, most me verbs use a kappa alpha as a tense formative in the aorist, okay? Remember, we saw the reduplication with the iota out front for rule 1 in the present. Reduplication sounded kind of like perfect. Kappa alpha is also kind of a perfect feature, okay? And so me verbs are going to have something we call kappa aorist. They're going to use this tense formative in order to form the aorist. So let me show you a couple paradigms here. You see the aorist me verb on the left there, edoka, edokas, edoke, edokamen, edokate, and edokan, okay? Those are the endings we would expect. We've got the augment to the left like we would expect. We have that kappa alpha in the middle, which is weird, okay? If you can just remember that with me verbs, that signifies the aorist, that will help you a lot. Compare it to the luo next to it, and then the perfect of luo there. Notice it's different. Leluka is different. It has that kappa alpha, but notice there's reduplication on the perfect of luo. There's not for the aorist me verb because it only has that reduplication thing going in the present. All right, so let me show you the full paradigm of didomi in the indicative here, okay? So here it is. So there's present, didomi, didos, didosi, didamen, didate, didaasin. Okay, then we've got the imperfect. Now remember, imperfect, we're going to use the present tense stem and put an augment on the front and use secondary endings. So notice we've got the reduplication on imperfect too. Edidun, edidus, edidu, edidamen, edidate, and edidun. That's going to be your imperfect, okay? And then you've got future there, doso, doses, dose, dosamen, dosete, dosusin, okay? Notice again that we did not repeat the weird endings. It's not disomi, for example. We didn't repeat those weird endings that we saw in the present active indicative. And we've got aorist, which we just looked at, edoka, edokas, etc. And then there's the perfect on the right. Notice we do have reduplication, but it's that reduplication with the epsilon like we would expect. We still have the kappa alpha there, but we have the reduplication with the epsilon out front, okay? So that is the full paradigm for the indicative. Why don't we go ahead and practice a couple of these, okay? Let's just do a little parsing together here. Here we go first. Look at this one. Feel free to pause and parse this on your own. If you need my help, that's okay. I can walk you through it too. Ediduce, okay? So what's the lexical form? That's what we want to do first, is identify the word. In this case, it's didomi, okay? Shocker, that's the word we're talking about. Probably not super hard, okay? Now, what are we going to do first with our Biblical Greek Made Easy method for verbal recognition? First, we're going to look to the left of the word, right? Okay? Do we see anything on the left that stands out to us? Actually, yeah, a couple things, right? First of all, we see what looks like an augment, which is going to signal to us past time, correct? And then we've still got the reduplication, the did going on there. At that point, I know what it is. It can only be one thing. There's only one form that has both an augment and the reduplication for me verbs, and it's the imperfect. Okay, so this is going to be imperfect active indicative, second person singular, that's sigma ending, second person singular of didomi, which means, can you translate? Can you tell me what it means? You were giving. Okay, it has to be that active, that past continual action. Active past continual action. You were giving is what that means. Okay, that was fun. Let's try another one. How about this one? Lexical form, didomi. Good. Look to the left. What do we see to the left? We see an augment there. Look to the middle. Do we see anything in the middle? Yes, we see a kappa alpha. And then we look to the right for the ending. What does this have to be? Right. Yes. Aorist active indicative, second person singular of didomi, meaning you gave. Correct. You gave. So past undefined action. It's you plural, by the way. You all gave is what that means. Okay? Good job. One more. How about this one? Dedoken. Dedoken comes from didomi. Okay? We look to the left. Do we see anything there? Yeah, we see reduplication. And what do you notice about that? Yeah, it's an epsilon reduplication instead of an iota reduplication. Okay, so this is perfect. We look to the middle. We see a kappa. We might be tempted to say aorist because we remember kappa aorist, but we know in this case that this is perfect active indicative, third person singular of didomi, meaning he has given. Very good. He has given. Good. All right, let's go ahead and switch gears to the non-indicative forms of didomi. Okay, we've learned the indicative forms, and we've looked at that whole paradigm. Let's talk about the non-indicative forms. There's a few of these we need to know, okay? Now note that the non-indicative forms are easier to recognize than the indicative forms. There's less variation. They're more predictable in that sense. However, there's one wrinkle. It wouldn't be Greek if I didn't give you some weirdness, a wrinkle to put in there. Didomi has first aorist forms in the indicative, and it's got second aorist forms in the other moods. So when we looked a minute ago at the aorist, we had kappa alpha rather than sigma alpha. We had those kappa aorists. When we get into the non-indicative forms, it's going to be a second aorist with a stem change going on, which is weird. I grant you, that just doesn't make any sense. Remember, anytime we encounter weirdness in Greek, I always remind you that there's no weirder language than English. It has millions of exceptions, and we just accept it because a lot of us are native speakers and we just grow up learning it. If you've learned English as a second language, you know about all the weird irregularities going on there. Okay? So here is the subjunctive of didomi. Okay, this is what it looks like. The present active subjunctive there on the left, dido, didos, dido, didomen, didote, and didosi. Okay, once again in the present, notice that it's got that reduplication on the front. Notice that it's got the lengthened vowel with the circumflex, which is a sign to you. It's a hint, right? So dido means I may give. Didos means you may give, etc. Okay? Then we look at the second aorist active, and we've got this stem change going on. We don't have an augment on the front because it's not past time. This is outside of the indicative, right? So we're not dealing with the indicative. In this case, we just have do, dos, do, domen, dote, dosin. Okay? And how do these differ in translation? Well, present is going to be continual action. So dido, I said I may give for that one. It might be better to say I may be giving. And do then would be I may give. Okay? But again, like that's technically correct. It's not always going to get translated that way. But that aspect, we do want to remember that aspect. That's present active tends to be more continual. The second aorist, or the aorist in general, tends to be more undefined. Okay, so be aware of that. But you see those paradigms there. These don't show up a ton in the New Testament, but enough that we need to at least see them and be able to recognize them if they show up. Okay? Here's the middle and passive of the subjunctive, okay? So you see the present middle passive subjunctive there. Remember, middle and passive are going to be together in the present. So we get didomai, dido, didotai, didomatha, didostha, didontai, okay? Notice that first one there, didomai, okay? The only difference is that circumflex, okay? That's going to be kind of that hint for you there, okay? Other than that, though, do you recognize the lengthened connecting vowel on the second half of those, okay? Then there on the second aorist middle, remember middle is its own thing in the aorist. We get domai, do, dontai, domatha, dosthe, and dontai. Do you need to remember all of these paradigms? No, you don't. Just look them over a few times, become familiar. These forms don't show up enough in the New Testament to memorize them, like know them cold, like some things we've tried to learn in the past, but we do want to have some familiarity with this, okay? And then finally, the aorist passive, see the theta in there, okay? The theta is signaling you that this is an aorist passive. Datho, dathes, dathe, dathomen, dathete, and dathosin. All right? So those are the subjunctive, middle, and passive forms for these. So let's talk about a couple others here, a couple other non-imperative forms, okay? So the imperatives are going to be super easy to recognize because they'll take the imperative morphemes just like other forms we've seen. So didato, for example, that toe on the end is that imperative morpheme that we've seen before. Okay, that's what we would expect. Infinitive, same way. They're going to be easy because it's going to look just like an infinitive. So for example, didanai, that ending, that nigh ending is going to signal infinitive to you. And then finally, participles follow participle rules. So we get didantas, dedusa, etc. Okay? And so those are all going to be fairly straightforward. Remember, most of the weirdness is happening in the present. Those are the forms that are going to show up the most in the New Testament. Okay? So let's learn the other me verbs that are going to show up in this chapter that show up a lot in the New Testament that you're going to need to learn. All right, the first one there, histemi, means I stand. We get the word stasis from this word, which means like stand still or at a sort of standing position, that sort of thing. What's going to happen with this one, it's going to lose that rough breathing and that iota on the front, and the sigma tau is going to look in a lot of forms kind of like the beginning of the word, okay? And then tithemi, you see the reduplication there. The theta reduplicates as a tau. That means I put or I place. Okay. And then we get deiknumi, which is a little bit different because notice we don't have the reduplication out front. Okay. That kind of follows its own rules, but for the most part, actually in some ways behaves more regular, just not so much like a me verb. And then we've got anistemi, okay, this is I rise or I get up. The noun anastasis means resurrection. Okay, we talk about the resurrection of Jesus, anastasis. This is just ana on the front of istemi, okay? So histemi is I stand, ana istemi is I rise, I get up, that sort of thing, okay? Aphiemi is I let go, I leave, I permit, can also be I forgive. This is one of the primary verbs used when sins are forgiven in the New Testament, for example. And that leave, flee kind of idea I like. It's as if when your sins are forgiven, your sins are just fleeing you. And then finally, phemi means I say or I affirm. Okay, another speaking verb, for example. All right. So those are the me verbs that show up a whole bunch of times in the New Testament that it's good to have some familiarity with. But didomi is going to be the most common. All right, so let's go ahead and finish strong, guys. We learned me verbs and all of their weirdness today. That's the last little layer of verbs that we need to be aware of, and they're kind of an offshoot, right? They're doing their own thing. There's just a handful of them, but we kind of learn them in a couple chapters and in this one class period here by themselves because they do kind of behave kind of in their own certain way, so we need to learn those together. And remember, we don't want to memorize every single paradigm, every single rule. We just want to have a little bit of a familiarity sheet so that when it shows up, we at least kind of know what we're dealing with a little bit. Maybe we use some helps to help us, and then we keep right on translating. All right, guys, and maybe most importantly, you also finished Module 2 of Biblical Greek Made Easy. Guys, that's awesome. That's exciting. You're moving forward. You kept going. Maybe it's been hard, but you finished. If you've kept up, once you review and do some homework here on me verbs, maybe you'll feel ready to take the final exam, and then you can send off and get the certificate for yourself to say that you finished Module 2, you finished a year of college and seminary biblical Greek. Your ability to engage with the New Testament is probably at a new level. I'm super excited for you about that. I so appreciate you joining up with us here at Biblical Greek Made Easy to help increase biblical literacy, to help gain an understanding of the original languages. Guys, that's so awesome. We're not done. Let's keep going together. Let's keep learning. Let's keep translating. And stay tuned to biblicalgreekmadeeasy.com for more of what we have for you. Until next time, goodbye for now. Happy studying and God bless.